gained a lot of pounds and then lost a lot of pounds. I did it with low carb, and I just love the idea that I could eat as much barbecue as I could literally stuff in my stomach and consider that a diet. So I'm going to get a plate and eat it on my way back to Raleigh a little bit later today. I appreciate everybody being here today. What we're trying to do with it, my name's Thom Tillis. I'm Speaker of the House. I'm from Mecklenburg County. But contrary to what most of y'all think, not all of Mecklenburg County is like Charlotte. We've got 7 different towns in Mecklenburg County, and 3 of them are up in my district, where I literally still have a cattle farm in my district. So there is such a thing as a rural area in Mecklenburg County. It's going away, but there's some out there. But I've served in the legislature for 2 terms, and back in January I started my 3rd term and was elected to Speaker of the House when something historic happened. And for those in the room, it could be a good historic thing or a bad historic thing. For me, it was a good historic thing. Republicans took majorities in the House and the Senate for the first time since about 140 years ago. So if you think about it, that's historic. Now, I want to have a town. What we decided we would do is something that we're not sure that many House and Senate leaders have done. When you think about town halls, you think about Congress people, or you think about individual members getting together from time to time, or you think about the governor. But we thought it was important for the legislative leadership to get out and talk with you all about a variety of things that you want to talk about. So we're doing these town halls across the state. We did 4 of them last week, got in front of probably all told more than 500 people in those 4 different town halls, probably somewhere closer to 600. And what we were looking for was feedback, constructive, either positive or negative feedback that we can use when we go back. And we'll get to questions pretty quickly. Y'all keep on eating though, and don't mind turning your back to me as long as you can hear me. Just keep on eating and enjoy your lunch. But before we get started, I do want to kind of tell you all what I've told everybody else. One thing that I've been accused, or one thing I have not been accused of as the Speaker, is being a little bit lax with the rules. When we're in the House chamber, if I'm as likely to gavel down a Republican member as I am a Democrat member as they speak out of turn or if they're out of order. I think that's the most important thing that we can do as leaders, to make sure that we set an example for how legislators are supposed to behave. And you start by showing mutual respect for people, even if you don't agree with them. So when we have these town hall meetings, I have a very similar sort of set of rules. One of the reasons I have Sergeant at Arms with me is because I believe that we need to show everybody respect, whether you agree or disagree with their points. So I appreciate the applause at the beginning. But 2 things I don't allow in our town hall meetings: I don't allow booze, and I don't allow applause, because either one of them is a slippery slope. And what we really want to do is just have people talk honestly and ask tough questions. There's a few people here I know that probably will ask me some tough questions, because they've gone to just about every town hall I've had, and that's okay, because that's a part of the process. But we want to make sure that we give everybody a chance to talk. Outside of that, anything's you can ask any question you want. You know, I guess I was back, I don't know if many of you were there, but I was back here at, was it Nash Community College? A while back. I know I see a couple of faces that seem familiar to me. I'm assuming that you all were there, but a lot of them are new faces. So let me tell you a little bit about what we did this session. From the business of I'm a business guy. And one of the things I wanted to do was come in and run the business of government differently. You know, democracy and government is not completely like a business. So there's stuff that we do here that you simply would not do in business, but the founding fathers had enough sense to know that you don't want the country to be run as a business. You had to have checks and balances and parts of a democratic process that you just never have in business. However, there is the business of government that we felt like we needed to go and do differently. And it had to do with a lot of little things, like we eliminated 1/3 of all standing committees. So before we came in, we realized there were just too doggone many committees, too many people with gavels, too much conflict for time, lack of clarity in how a bill got through the legislature. So we eliminated a third of all the standing committees in the House. We also implemented through rules that no legislator could file more than 10 bills over a 2-year period. Now, we had a couple of members kick up their heels over that. I think the best, the most accurate, and the funniest comment that I heard out of that came from Representative Leo Daltrey. When everybody was mad and they said, you know, why in the world would you only allow me to file 10 bills? He got it and said, folks, I've been around here a long time. I haven't seen a single legislator who's come up with 10 good ideas over a 2-year period. And the fact of the matter is, what's really happened is by limiting the bills, 40% fewer bills, and we're talking about a few thousand bills, okay? So we're talking about 600 or 800, I don't know the exact number, close to 800 bills that in 2009 got filed, didn't get filed this time, because they weren't bills that were going to go through the process anyway. You know, it could be any, they call them run-on bills, where somebody says, okay, I hear your point, I'm going to file that bill, but they're not going to run that bill, they're not going to have support for it, so they clog up the system. So we eliminated the standing committees, third of them. We eliminated a lot of these distractions that we knew we weren't going to get to anyway. And then we started the legislative process a month earlier than normal. Because normally when you'd come in January, you'd get elected a speaker, and then you'd sit down and figure out what the seat assignments on the floor was going to be, and where the office assignments were going to be, and who was going to be committee chairs, who was going to be appointed to the committees. All that was done before I was ever elected speaker. We did that in January. So that literally, we started taking up legislation the following day. Normally, you'd consume about 15 or 20 pounds of artichoke dip, and you'd go to a lot of different socials and get-togethers, get to know people in February while a small group of people were working on that. We got that all out of the way, which gave us an extra month earlier to get started. End result of that was in the shortest legislative session since 1973, and the most productive 83 days since they've been keeping statistics. In other words, we got more bills through the process, ratified, and moved on either to the Senate or to the governor than since they've been recording those numbers. That's something I'm very proud of, and it's because we also had people like Representative Collins. Do we have any other members here? And other people actually working really hard. And I don't think you didn't get many opportunities to get bored, did you, Jeff? No. We kept folks busy, we worked hard, we got results, we got out. Now, some people have said, well, you really got out, but technically you didn't, because we came back for redistricting. We had to do redistricting. We came back for 4 days to pass the district plans in the middle of July. We're going to come back for about 3 more days in September. So we're going to add 7 days. We'll tack 7 days on to that June 18th adjournment date. It is still one of the earliest sessions since 1973. It's probably still right up there with 1973, even when you add those additional legislative days in. So people that say we've created a year-round legislature, we're playing games with numbers, needs to look at the facts, because the fact of the matter is this is the shortest, most productive session that's been around since most people have been around politically. We did a lot of good things. We passed a budget. When we had the budget, we had a $3 billion deficit. Now, in North Carolina, some of y'all may know, we have a constitutional mandate to have a balanced budget. So prior leaders say, well, our budget's been balanced, so you couldn't have had a deficit. But I'll ask you all, if you have a budget that, if you were budgeting in your household and you decided to make a budget on money you knew wasn't going to be there the following month, you budget this year for something, for long-term obligations, you knew you weren't going to have the money the following year, I consider that a structural deficit. The fact of the matter is there was a $1.5 billion structural deficit because the budget was balanced on federal stimulus money, which went away on June 30th. There was another $1.5 billion deficit because the budget was founded on a promise that the prior legislature made to the citizens that the temporary tax increase, sales tax, and income tax surcharges would go away on June 30th. Those are both budget deficits. Now, we couldn't have gotten the money from the federal government. I suppose that we could go back on the promise made by the prior legislature and just keep those taxes going, but we didn't think that was right. So we cut spending. A lot of times it was difficult. I think by and large we did the right thing. There's a few things we're looking at and see if we have to go back and rethink them next year. But by and large, I think we got the spending cuts right. And we also got it right by putting $1.5 billion back into the private sector, by getting rid of the $1.127 billion sales tax and by getting rid of the income tax surcharges, let those money go back to the private sector where private sector jobs can be created. Other things we did, I'll be happy to answer questions about the budget. We passed medical malpractice reform, general tort reform, regulatory reform, some reforms in Medicaid to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. Something around here where a few people had some passion about it, annexation reform. And a number of other things, and a bill that's kind of hard to understand, but it has to do with forced combined reporting, and it had to do with the way the Department of Revenue deals with companies that operate in multi-states, but it was a huge impact on big business employers, job creators. The last thing we did in the budget, or in terms of tax reform, before I go to questions, is we've in the budget, how many people are small business people? Okay, how many of you are small business people who report your taxes through just your personal income, flows through to your personal income? Okay. One of the things that we did in the budget is we have put a provision in there that exempts the first $50,000 of active income reported on your income tax return. And the reason that we did that is in North Carolina, about 80% of our economy is based on small business. And what we wanted to do was try and find some direct way to get some money back into those small businesses. And some people will say, well, you exempted it, it's only $3,500, $4,000. But I know folks that if they can get an extra $3,500 or $4,000, that means something. It could mean training, it could mean collectively going out and buying stuff that collectively creates a job for somebody else that those small businesses work with. It's real money. So for people to say that that's a pittance, they probably aren't talking to people that are just trying to find the extra few $1,000s to make payroll and make rent every once in a while. So I think that it does have an impact. It's only step one. Last thing I'll leave you with is, how many of y'all watched the press and heard about all the partisan bickering and stuff going on in Raleigh? Right? This is a math thing because I just don't understand it. We passed out over 470 bills in the 83 days that we were in session. The governor only vetoed 15 of them. 6 of those we've already overridden. So the governor, now we're down to a net of 9 where the legislature differs with the governor. Now, if this is all partisan and if we're really pushing this right-wing agenda and all these other things, if the governor's only succeeded in the override of 9 vetoes, then I have to wonder whether or not the minority party and the governor are co-conspirators to this crazy right-wing agenda. Because otherwise you'd think you'd have 100 vetoes or you'd have all these other things. The fact of the matter is it's not the case. Now we do have differences ideologically, there are different things that we're doing, but if you just look at the numbers, the rhetoric doesn't reconcile with the numbers. I think that we've had great bipartisan support. We did something historic here. We had 6 courageous Democrats vote with us, and in some cases more than 5, and in some cases more than 5, vote with us on veto overrides, on bills that made sense, jobs bills, bills that focus on the economy. That's never happened before. So I think to the contrary, when we as a majority have been able to convince members of the minority to work with us to try and get on track with our jobs and economies agenda, I think what you can say is we've done something that the past legislatures haven't done, and that's reach across the aisle, find other people to support the agenda, up to and including the ability to override a governor's veto. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. We've got Jeff here, who's been an extraordinary addition to our caucus. We have 23 freshman members. We have 68 Republican members, 120 total in the House. Jeff has come in, and from the beginning, actually from the time I met him, which was in the summer of 2009 when we were out recruiting and securing good candidates, he's been incredibly impressive, and I'm telling you, you all should be very proud of his representation in Raleigh because he's an extraordinary leader. He's stepping up, handling complex bills already, and he can hold his own on the floor in any floor debate as well. So with that, happy to answer questions. We'll start right up front.
I'd like to hear more about the jobs bill that you were talking about.
A couple of them. One would be the jobs bill that comes in the form of tax relief, $1.5 billion. The sales tax, a lot of people have argued that the sales tax is just a penny, why don't you keep it on the books? But it's really not a penny when 40% of those taxes paid are paid by businesses before they ever sell a product or service. So one of the jobs bills is simply tax relief, putting money back in the private sector so that private sector jobs can be created. We've seen what's happened with stimulus money and government jobs. When the money runs out, the unemployment rate goes up again. A lot of the unemployment issues we're seeing now are directly related to the fact that most of the stimulus money stopped being spent on June 30th. So one is tax relief. The General Tort Reform Bill is another bill that is actually one where we're reducing the cost of doing business here, and it is having a material effect on businesses that are planning to relocate here. I've literally seen workers' comp and tort reform, two measures that came through the House, as bills that businesses that are considering relocating here is seeing something that makes us more competitive with our peer states in the Southeast. Go back to workers' comp. For the first time in about 20 years, we got a good bill in workers' comp that makes us more competitive with our border states, where our cost for workers' comp was so much greater than our border states, Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia. That is a bill where I literally viewed on an evaluation sheet for a major employer that's looking at Eastern North Carolina to set up 1,500 manufacturing jobs as something that they view as a differentiator. Regulatory reform. The thing that we've tried to do with regulatory reform is say anytime you want to implement regulation that goes beyond federal standards, you have to have a well-reasoned business case. You have to actually come in and talk about the cost and benefits. It could be ecological, safety, depending upon the regulatory environment, but you have to have a sound business case for actually doing that if it exceeds federal standards. So the regulatory reform, and that's only phase one, that's what we'll do most of the time in the second session, are all measures that independent people have gone out and calculated that they will have positive jobs impacts. The tax alone, basically through Keenan Flagler, which is pretty independent of anything some people would consider liberal leaning, have asserted that several thousand jobs will be created through the tax measures. So, a jobs bill, when you think about a jobs bill, normally what you think about is the government going to spend money to hire people. And our jobs bill has more to do with the government providing money back to the private sector, clawing back needless regulations so that private sector employers can go create jobs. Yes, sir.
I know we were unsuccessful in overriding the governor's veto on the voter ID, but I know there's still some light left in that, and I'd like you to comment on that. And secondly, as you know, we're the only state in the South that doesn't have a marriage amendment defining marriage between one man and one woman, and I wonder why we didn't bring it up in the first session. I know you got it on the agenda for the second, and I really appreciate what you guys are doing.
I'm moving around to get everybody's necks a break. Figure if I move around a little bit, y'all can kind of rotate. So if you see me moving, I'm doing that to get everybody a little bit different perspective. On voter ID, that's a bill where I want to talk a little bit about compromise and disappointment. When we first started with the voter ID bill, I had the members in my office who were going to be the primary sponsors of the bill. And we started out with a bill that was premised on Indiana and Georgia law mainly. And the reason we went with them is I wanted legislation that had already been challenged in the Supreme Courts and been upheld. And in the case of Indiana and Georgia, there had been. So that was the starting point, more so Georgia than Indiana, but both of those played a role. We filed a bill, started sending it through the process, and we got a huge opposition. And it was clear to me that it was going to go down a strict party line vote. The governor had intimated to me that it was an unacceptable bill. So I knew we were headed down that path. We don't have a supermajority. We're 4 votes shy of a supermajority. So the things that we do in the House require collaboration if we expect that it's going to be subject to a gubernatorial veto. So I had a couple of members come to me and say, Tom, I've heard some legitimate concerns from AARP and seniors groups. I've heard some legitimate concerns from groups that represent disabled persons, other things that I think we ought to think about. Would you be okay if we try and see if we can get some sort of compromise bill in place that goes beyond just the hardcore picture ID? Now, when we talk about picture ID, we're talking about a government-issued ID. So it'd be your driver's license, you know, state employee identification card, a school identification card. If you were a senior citizen, even if your driver's license had expired, if you still have it, that was going to be allowed. So it wasn't just as hardcore as everybody thought, but it was still a picture ID. It also had provisions for paying to get somebody an ID if they didn't have one, either at the DMV or at the Board of Elections. But that still wasn't acceptable. So we decided to introduce language that said, let's go down the path of the HAVA documents, Help America Vote. Other states have implemented it where you could have a voter registration card, utility bill, something that made it likely that if you showed up, you've actually been at that residence that you say you're representing. So going down that path, and I don't know if any of y'all did it. If you did, raise your hand. I have no ill will, but boy, I got hammered. When I allowed that, they call it a proposed committee substitute, to be considered in committee, particularly my friends, the North Carolina Federation of Republican Women, a lot of other people, they got on email, and boy, I tell you what, that's just not a group you want to make mad. And we did. But what we were trying to do is say, guys, we're trying to get something done. We want to restore confidence in elections. I hear in some of the town halls people saying, well, there's no evidence that there's ever been fraud. So the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. I've said that in a few other sessions. The fact of the matter is, I could go down to Nash County Board of Elections. I don't know anything about this county in terms of the voter demographic, but I know a lot about technology. And I know I could get the voter rolls on a disk, and I know within about 30 minutes of getting that imported on my PC to an Access database or an Excel spreadsheet, I could find 200 people in this county who, in abstract, look just like me. You know, a 51-year-old, white male who hadn't voted for the last 10 years or doesn't ever vote in primaries. And I can go around all the polls and say I'm whoever that person is and vote as many times as I wanted to. The opportunity for abuse is significant. So this was about restoring confidence in elections. But we were willing to do all this compromise. We were moving along. My committee members, my caucus was mad at us. My committee members were getting beat up. A lot of our base was mad at us. But we were still charging forward because sometimes when you're in the leadership role, you want to get something done. And if you can't take all you want, you try and take at least some ground. But then we had it communicated to us through channels that no matter what we passed, it was likely to be vetoed. So then I found myself in a position saying, hold on a minute, I'm going to fail at the end of the process, and the only thing I'm going to have show for it is our base feeling like they've been betrayed in terms of something that's important to them. As a leader, that made no sense at all. So we put in another PCS, stripped it back to the baseline ID bill. That's what got passed. It got vetoed by the governor. We had it up for a vote. We lost it along party line votes. We have a procedure in place, though, that we don't let vetoes, contrary to what the governor thought, and I think many legislative members, that it'd just be an up or down vote and that'd be it for the year. Now, we have a procedure in place where we will keep those votes alive forever, or for as long as I'm speaker anyway. And so I've made it very clear to the minority, you come up 7 votes down one day, we'll override it. You better show up for work. You override these vetoes, you better be prepared to show up for work and defend your position every day. They say that a little heavy-handed. I said, if asking people to show up for work is heavy-handed, then yes, I am heavy-handed. But we will continue to push that. And I will tell people, and I will tell you now, if I felt like we could come up with a compromise bill, I would still try and encourage people to let us do it, because I would like to begin to restore confidence in government. I would like to challenge the governor to reach across the aisle, do what a lot of Democrat majority states have done, and implemented voter ID bills, and be a part of that. But right now, she's the reason why it's not happening. Your question about defensive merits is purely a strategic one, and I'm the one to blame for it. We had a lot of things to get done. The defensive merits issue is an issue that is going to has required a lot of attention, a lot of capacity. We made a commitment to the voters when they elected us last year to get an agenda executed on jobs and the economy, to get the budget done, and to get some of our key reforms done, because we have got to get this economy and jobs back on track. And I try to communicate very honestly and directly with folks. who are very passionate about defensive marriage and said, guys, there's a time and a place for that. And right now, as much as we were doing in May and June, we would not have had the capacity to do that and everything else, which is why we came up with this idea of having a constitutional session and having the focus on it. But my job for all the members in the legislature was trying to keep focus on that core agenda. And it was at the end of the day, I'm the person who was responsible. I don't think that the same momentum that we had for all of the reform, the jobs and economy issues we had necessarily translated into momentum for defensive marriage. It's a very different bill with a very different set of supporters and detractors. So, you know, if I did think that we could have built on that momentum and leveraged it, I may have done it, but in my judgment, it just wasn't there. But it is something that will be taken up September 12th and through the 14th. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, there's two taxes that we have that put us at a real disadvantage with our neighboring states, the gas tax and the corporate income tax.
Yep.
Any chance we can make some headway on reducing those or maybe even eliminating one?
Yes. Now, I will tell you on corporate income tax, we asked whether or not we should go ahead and bring down the corporate income tax rate as part of our job strategy this time. We met with a lot of businesses, and a lot of the larger corporations, only about 460 of them that file corporate taxes, whereas there's close to 400,000 who report active income through their personal income tax statements. So we went, I mean, that's a big number. And it actually kind of fits with that 80-20 on business and job creators. It's a big number. But what we decided we would do is go out and say, if we're going to do something to try and alleviate the uncertainty or the tax burden on the major corporations, what would it be? Most of them came back and said, if you could force the Department of Revenue to give us very clear guidelines on corporate tax reporting when you're in a multi-state environment, that's worth as much to us as lowering the overall rate for some of the larger employer base. So we ended up doing that as phase one. We want to cut in half or eliminate the corporate income tax, ultimately. But we didn't really have there was no way to do it. The economic impact of just cutting it now, there's no way we could have balanced the budget that anybody would have been satisfied with. The level of cuts that we would have had to have implemented, I think would have been very disruptive and very difficult to implement. But in 2013, when we get reelected and we come back, starting now with the goal towards implementing in 2013, a broad-based lower rate strategy that either cuts or eliminates the corporate tax is something we very much want to do. Dan.
Quick follow-up on that point. Isn't it 460 corporations actually have positive corporate income tax liability?
Right.
Because they're having so many losses, they haven't been able.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But about 460 of them actually have something that they'd like to keep more of. Let's put it that way.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. The rest of them are just in the tank.
But they filed, but they just don't have it.
That's correct.
Have lost.
That's correct. We'll go over this side, right behind the camera.
Sort of hiding behind the camera. Thank you, Speaker. Calvin Peck from Baldwin Island, and thought it was important enough to leave our hurricane prep to come here to ask this question. It's not about annexation. But it's about municipal authority. And it appears that the legislature, on a pretty regular basis, decided to punish municipalities for the excess of a few in a lot of different areas, whether it be wells or just a lot of different things. And to put that sort of restriction on municipal authority doesn't seem to be restoring the confidence in government.
Yeah. Well, I don't necessarily agree with the premise that we punished a few because let me tell you, if you're talking about annexation, understand that what I was trying to do, it was one of the key ones, and it was one of the ones that the League of Municipalities led opposition to. They ultimately did not openly oppose the annexation reform. And that's because I was trying to fight, I think even you were okay with it, a moratorium. I mean, I was in a position where I was trying to eliminate a moratorium that would put us in the same place that Virginia was. I was a town commissioner. I understand that towns need to have some authority. But I will also tell you, there are not just a few, but a lot of examples of towns that absolutely walked all over personal property rights, took things that they shouldn't have, and are still not delivering the core services. The only thing they've delivered is a tax bill. And so, in that particular case, they made the bed. What I tried to do was prevent just a complete swing in the other direction so that everybody suffered. We worked with a lot of small towns, and I think we ultimately got to a place with annexation reform that the league decided they weren't going to openly oppose it. Of course, they'd like to have the current rules, but of course there were a lot of people who'd like to have a moratorium, and my job was trying to get somewhere in the middle. On the other things, if you're talking about towns not being able to set up shop for competing with high-speed cable companies and internet providers, that to me is a scope of government issue. Towns and counties should not be in the business of competing with things that are being done just fine in the private sector. Do we all get mad when we call AT&T and these other cable companies and they tell you to reboot your PC and reload your software and do something? We all have a customer service complaint, right? But I don't want a town commissioner, and in my case, I've got a friend who's a town commissioner in my district who happens to actually double as a customer service rep for the cable company that they provided, because they're in financial difficulty right now and they're all hands on deck for doing it. So that was one where I was clearly at peace with limiting exactly what towns could do to compete against the private sector. When you get into the other issues like wells and other things, to be honest with you, I'd have to talk with you about the specific measure. But I think if you go to the League of Municipalities and you go to the counties, we've been thanked for not taking the governor's recommended budget and shifting costs down to the towns and counties. That's an example where our leadership said we're not going to do that to the local municipalities. We're not going to let that happen. I think that they will thank us for not letting the pendulum swing and just let a moratorium be here where they'd be fighting for annexation authority for the next 2 decades. So I think in fairness, if I looked at it, and I have met with the urban mayors, the mayors, about half of them or a third of them from the 25 largest cities, and I've met with the league. We've got a good working relationship. We have to move on. But there is a reality that we have to deal with here. The League of Municipalities represents about 550 towns across the state of North Carolina. They have had a relationship with a Democratic Party majority, and many of their members are from the Democratic Party and have a different world view about the relationship of the towns to their constituents. So we are necessarily going to be in a different place now that you have a conservative worldview running things. So a part of what the league, and I've had this honest discussion with the league, is let's find areas where what the towns want to do are consistent ideologically with what we as a leadership are going to do. And let's stay away from the things that you're probably just not going to be successful with. I had a county commissioner come up to me and say, you've taken away my right to do, it's like you've overstretched your authority in the way I deal with a private citizen. And I said, no, what we've made absolutely certain is that private property owner's right is asserted and that we're protecting their rights. We represent them locally too. And when we see something that we think is a usurpation of property rights and the ultimate right of people to enjoy the fruits of their labor and the ownership of their property, that's probably a few places where we'll still come in conflict. But I think we got a good working relationship with the league. Kelly could tour those folks. I haven't seen them sending out a whole bunch of emails hating me recently. That happened a little bit earlier in the session, but we got past it. So check out the league broadcast. We'll go over, anybody got a question over here? Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe in government interfering in personal decisions?
I struggle with that if you're talking about the DOMA question or other things. I personally am a limited government. I have a very strong view that when government gets involved in telling people what they should do in their houses or what they should do personally, it's something that you need to be very deliberate in your thinking and very limited in terms of the number of times you use government authority to do that.
And why did you support a bill that puts the government right in the middle of a private decision?
Are we talking about DOMA?
For woman and for doctor.
Because that's a bill that ultimately allows people, that is a bill that I'm very outspoken pro-life advocate. I believe that having an informed decision that experts say will ultimately have someone with that information available I do believe that the news reports are wrong. I believe it's done in a respectful way that allows 24 hours to pass and the assurance that information is presented to an expectant mother, that she will make a decision, that a few thousand more lives will be brought into this world because that information will change their ultimate decision.
So
But the
you don't
bill,
think-
let me finish my statement, and I'll let you go follow up. The bill does not abridge the ultimate decision or the right of that expectant woman to move forward with an abortion. It does set certain criteria for the information that we want to be sure is provided consistently across the state.
Well, do you not think that a doctor can provide informed information?
Well, I do, but I do think that there is something to be said for the analysis which suggests that some 2,000 abortions, which typically occur in this state, won't because of something that has occurred in the interaction between that expectant mother and the doctor with this law in place that without it would have led to what apparently is an abortion. So it suggests to me that somehow that interaction between that expectant mother and that physician has caused some of them to change their mind and to potentially bring the baby to term and adopt it or do other things. But on that basis, I was willing to recognize that life that potentially be brought into the world is an instance where I'm okay with government moving a little bit further. It does not abridge the right to actually move forward with carrying through with abortion. Next question. Lige, you got a question?
No, I'm glad Dan asked the question about the corporations, because 460 was low to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just on the number there actually, where actually the rate would be relevant. And you're not making money, you're not paying taxes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
According to the news media and the governor, obviously, that we had a big issue with education this year.
Yeah.
Can you help us with that?
Yeah, I was in Charlotte on Monday, and I was at the chamber meeting, and we were thrilled with the announcement that there were 70 new jobs coming in for a company that's relocated its headquarters over to Mecklenburg County. And I decided to also reinforce the message. There's also another major jobs announcement. It's in Mecklenburg County. There are 500 open teaching positions that we need to get teachers into. Some of them are net new. Some of them are replacing attrition, but some of them are net new positions. Why do I tell you that? Because when we were doing the budget back in May, we had a lot of reporters, maybe a few of the folks in the room, who were talking about tens of thousands of teaching jobs being lost across the state. And what we found is in most of the major school systems, all of those claims have been retracted, and they're talking about, well, we did lose some non-teaching. Well, our focus was on the classroom, teachers and teaching assistants. We knew that they had to tighten their belt in other areas. But what we found were some pretty innovative things happening in Mecklenburg schools. They've actually extended the school day 45 minutes. There's probably a mother or father in the room mad about that because it changes your schedule. But the fact of the matter is it saved monies in transportation. It also is believed to actually help improve classroom outcomes. So what we ended up doing was holding firm on our budget assumptions. And incidentally, our budget cuts from the governor were single-digit percentage point differences. This was not major. That's why we were amazed the governor vetoed the budget versus working with us to get to a compromise. But most of the wild claims have gone away. And we're about to start school. And what we're going to do next year in education oversight is go to every one of the school systems and say we want to see last year's starting numbers, this year's starting numbers, and we want to separate the rhetoric from reality. And I think for the most part, we found, in many cases, people found the money. I think it was Guilford County said, oh, we found the money. How do you find money in government? I don't know how that works, but they found money. Mecklenburg County found money that was in reserve. So apparently I think it was leftover money in stimulus. They found money. And I tell you that because it's one of the reasons why folks that say, well, you should have kept that tax in, you should have raised taxes here. Folks, there are hundreds of millions of dollars in money out there that I do not think are being spent in the best and most appropriate way. And until I can go through and review the areas of state and feel reasonably certain that we are spending the money appropriately and we're not wasting money, I think it's on the verge of immoral for me to use the ultimate authority of the state to tell you, I got a budget problem, and I'm going to mandate that you pay me more money to fix my problem, and if you don't, I'm going to send you to jail, when I know there's a lot of waste and other things out there that we should do before we exercise that option. There may be a point in time in my political career where I would come out and look somebody in the eye and say, we need to raise taxes. Because we just don't have enough money, and I'm convinced that every dime that we're spending, or virtually every dime we're spending, is being well spent, but we're a long way away from that right now. Yes, sir.
Would you speak to the fraud and abuse that may be in the Medicaid program?
Yeah, actually, it's one of the veto overrides. We passed a bill that was specifically focused on doing things to reduce the waste, fraud, and abuse. The governor vetoed it. We overrode it. There is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. And when we talk about waste and fraud and abuse, most of that waste, fraud, and abuse, just to remove public perceptions, is not individuals. There is some of that. There's the person who fakes back pain and goes to 4 different ERs and gets OxyContin and then sells it on the market. That happens. But more often than not, it's the healthcare providers. It's people that are gaming the system and actually hoodwinking people into, well, you need this service, take this service, and they're making the money, and those people are innocent or should be held harmless. But those folks, the providers that are doing it, we need to pass laws that make it 3 times more expensive for them if we catch them than what they ever made. Treble damages and things like that, to actually make it very clear, if you come in and you steal from the system that's trying to help the most helpless among us, it's going to hurt. And this bill was the first step. We've got to do a lot more. There was another one while we were shocked that the governor overrode it. It was a consensus bill. It was in the Senate. Came over, went a little partisan in the House, but we still had enough votes to override it. Step 1. We had a hand over here, sir.
To follow up on the education question, I had a principal last night who, in a not implicit way, but an implied way, let us know that they were unhappy with the current legislature that took money away from their school, and B, the parents would have to carry that burden because they weren't. And not real happy with that. Essentially, it's a social tax between PTO and all these other events. They want us to carry the cost that they lost. And are there any rules, or is there anything in place to help reduce that?
Well, first off, one thing I didn't mention, 5 years ago, I was the PTSA president at Hopewell High School. I have volunteered in schools for as long as my kids were in school. Now they're in college, so it's been 2 years, 3 years removed. But I've been on the ground, and I've spent a lot of time in public schools as a volunteer, as a fundraiser, as somebody had to go raise money and pay for supplies because the school systems weren't providing it. Volunteering in Classroom Central and other things that we have over in Mecklenburg County where you can go get supplies for underfunded classrooms. Now, when you're talking about the rules, give me a clarification on the question.
Well, I mean, essentially, he's let us know that instead of working to be more efficient, they're going to work against a deficiency, and they want us to make it slack. And again, it wasn't implicit, but it was heavily handed down to us as parents that we'd have to carry some of that burden.
Well, I'd like to, and we won't do it publicly, but I'd like to know who those folks are, because they're the folks we want to get up in legislative oversight and explain those actions. Because I want these schools, the superintendents that decide to play politics need to understand all politicians can play politics. So if they want to play those games, they need to come up and explain why they're telling the parents and the school system employees that. We want to understand why. It may be right-minded, or it may just be a game. If it's a game, we need to spend some quality time with them to understand how we can eliminate those games. But one of the things that we need to do, and we will, I mean, honestly, I don't have any time for that sort of stuff. I'm only here for a short time longer, and I'm here to get something done, and I'm sick of these games that get played with parents' psyches over all the devastating things they have to deal with come school opening.
And that's what I'm speaking to. That's exactly
I think it's wrong. And I think when there is documented evidence in the press and else where people have staked themselves out, they better have either a good reason for why they changed their position or a good reason for why they asserted it to begin with, because it's that distraction that's costing us time and money at the expense of the kids. And all I really care about in the classroom are the kids, the teachers, and the teaching assistants. Anybody outside of that, they come second. They're important. There's a lot of things in education, the superintendents, the principals, the assistant principals, the advisors. They're all important, but they're secondary to that classroom. We got to work on it. Part of what we have to do, though, when I was PTA president, we were trying to get a new principal hired at the high school because the old principal was incompetent. We'd actually worked on getting him fired, and he did. Then we had an opening, and it was just this lengthy process, and I couldn't understand why a very competent superintendent just couldn't put a principal in that school and move on. And I found out that the state mandates that the appointment of high school principals go through this appointment process with the school board and everything else. So they politicized that operational decision. So that kind of sent a red flag up. I said, well, what other things are out there that the state mandates? How much of this dysfunction is not well-meaning people just doing things wrong, but how much of this is they're navigating this morass of legislation that comes from Raleigh? There are over 500 pages of statutes, laws, that dictate what school systems do. Now that's at the top of the pyramid. Then there are thousands of pages of regs, regulations that come from DPI and other places that interpret those laws into operationally how we're going to be compliant with the law. And then there are all these things that we do at the local level. At the top of that pyramid, we got to go back and figure out how much of that we can claw back and put down to the local level to operate school systems the way it makes sense. Because I'm convinced that the way Mecklenburg County needs to operate has something in common with Nash, but a lot not in common. We got to figure out how to actually free them up to do that. And hopefully some of those bad behaviors will go away in the process. Any other question over here? Take the man over here with.
Question I have, obviously the fires that occurred along the coast this summer brought up the fact that there are some issues with our Forest Service and how they fight fires, and obviously it pointed to the fact that some of the equipment necessary for those kind of sporadic operations are not currently in inventory with North Carolina. We had to borrow equipment from other states and do other things. Is there an intent to address that issue or any other emergency management issues in the next session?
I'm hoping we're going to look at some of that even in the interim. We're about to start up interim committees. And the idea, I mean, a lot of what you've seen, I've been out on the East Coast a lot this year, and I was amazed how more often than not, there was smoke in the air from some, wildfire, either in North Carolina or across the border in Virginia in particular. I don't know if that's on the initial agenda, but Jordan, we should, if we can get this man's contact information, it will come up in the interim committee, and the interim committee would be what would ultimately dictate if we take any legislative action in the short session. But we'll be certain that you at least know the committee that's tasked with it, and you can be informed on when they're meeting. So we'll make sure, the gentleman over here, Jordan Shaw, is with me. He's one of the members of my staff over in this corner. Before you leave, or actually our Sergeant at Arms will get your contact information, and if you don't get a follow-up from somebody over the next 2 weeks, just call my office directly and tell them if you had a question from this event, we'll make sure you can follow up on it. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, Eastern North Carolina suffers as a result of electric cities decisions that were made a long time ago, and the circumstances have changed. Is there any process or any discussions that are going on within the state that may help Eastern North Carolina, the portions that are in electric cities, compete with those people who are just across the street who are on Progress?
I just have that. How many people here know the basis for the gentleman's question? Just to give you an idea, I was on a town board that owned an electric city too. They got involved with part ownership in a nuke. It didn't work out too bad for them, but they got this debt. A lot of towns, there are 3 different ways that electric is provided, fundamentally 3 different ways electric is provided in North Carolina. You have the investor-owned utilities like Progress and Duke, a little bit of Dominion. They're the big power companies that generate and then through transmission and distribution get to your home. There are also co-ops. There are co-ops across the state that came together because electric wasn't getting out in certain areas. People came together and did co-ops, and that's how they get the electricity. They don't actually generate it. They just distribute it to the home. They don't even transmit it. They just distribute it to the home. Transmission's those big, you see the big power lines going around. That's called transmission. The smaller lines are called distribution. Then the last one is called electric cities. In electric cities, towns got into the business of being municipal electric companies. That's where the gentleman's question is. The electric cities also got together a while back, and some of them said, hey, it'd be really smart to go ahead and make an investment in a nuclear power plant. There were a couple of nukes at the time. We invested in Catawba, I think. I don't know which one y'all invested in.
Sure.
Yeah. But they said we're really smart. We kind of get it on the ground floor. We'll invest in this base load. Nuclear power plants provide what's called base load. It's the most reliable source of energy of the sources, fossil fuels and hydro, other ones. So you know, we get it on the ground floor, we may be able to be in a position where we'll have a good base load, very economic base load. Didn't work out. Right now, trying to retire debt, and it's very expensive. And what's happened now is in some towns, I've got a town that in Cornelius, where I was town commissioner, where I have Duke, Energy United, which is a co-op, and Electric City servicing the citizens. And what the gentleman meant by walking across the street is you could literally, if you're being served by Duke or Energy United, your electric cost could be 15, 20, 30% lower than the person right across the street who's served by Electric Cities, because they were there for a long time. And that hurts, because that means that that group of people, you can't attract commercial and industrial business there. You're not going to create jobs, because most of the inputs on new manufacturing, the most expensive part is power. So you're basically asking the question, how do I get out of that? Now, what we've talked about, I had the same discussion with Newbern last week, with a number of other people. One of the things they're trying to do is use this potential merger between Duke and Progress as a strategic wedge there. We have to be careful, because I'd like to find a way to have that merger happen, but also see if there's a way to solve this problem. Because not making the merger happen doesn't necessarily mean that the problem is going to get solved. What it could mean is somebody from out of state buys Progress, and we lose the job creation, we lose jobs, and we lose critical mass in this industry. So it's a complex issue. Just in full disclosure, just want to let you know where I am on that other argument. What we've talked about is getting with Electric Cities and figure out if there is a way to help these towns that are these electric cities that made a bad business decision. People need to put the cards on the table and say, I made a bad business decision, now I'm trying to get out from underneath it, and figure out a way to do it. I personally think Golden Leaf's going to solve the problem for us. No, I'm kidding. Anytime I get a shot at Dan, I get it in. But no, we got to work on it. But that's something that since I've done these town halls, has bubbled up. I'm actually meeting. I may, if the hurricane doesn't change my plans over the weekend. I'm meeting with some Electric Cities people this weekend over in. I think they're in Asheville, having a statewide meeting. I think it's Asheville.
If we could just minimize it some. I mean, every bit helps.
Yeah, it is. But it really, I mean, it really is a situation where everybody needs to go. We're trying to help people out of what proved to be a bad business decision. It sounded good at the time, proved not to be, and we got to kind of begin from that premise and work with people to try and solve it, because at the end of the day, it affects ratepayers and taxpayers. Jeff?
Well, you know that Senator Newton and I are going to be heading to that study committee, and that's going to be our main focus.
Yeah, we do have an interim committee, and we're taking it seriously. So we've got an interim committee looking at it, trying to figure out a way to do it. Was there a lady over here? Yes, ma'am.
I've got another question that kind of off track of some of the things we discussed today, but I'm in the jewelry business, and I've encountered a great deal of counterfeits coming through during the gold buying frenzy. And
counterfeit coins or
counterfeit jewelry, meaning it's marked 14 karat yellow,
and it's not.
Carat stamp. It's got a fake stamp of the maker's mark and everything, and it's happened a lot really recently. And you know, we've caught some of it, and then we've got a box of shame, you know. And we were discussing the possibility of finding someone to tell them, how can we get this confiscated? Is it legal to confiscate it? Can we? This is a big deal for us.
Because basically you're talking about thieves. I mean, people
We've
that are
got
misrepresenting
thieves,
them.
yeah.
I've got a brother who's a jeweler over in Tennessee, and I might have to ask him about it. We haven't talked about it, but he buys and sells jewelry. That's something I want to make sure that we follow up on, because to me it's thematically consistent with some bills that I filed when I was in the minority that got passed on metal theft in general, like copper theft. People stealing copper out of houses, or stealing HVAC units and things, or catalytic converters. Those are big, because there's a lot of precious metals in catalytic converters, and people are, spending a lot of money on them. And we ended up passing some laws that actually gave more authority to collection points and trying, what could you do what could you legally do if there's a reasonable suspicion that when that dude backs up with a truckload of sewer caps, he probably didn't get them legally. And that happens, or a truckload of catalytic converters and things like that when you're not in the muffler business. So that's something I don't have a direct answer for you now. It's the first time I've had it brought up, but we'll make sure that we get somebody back in touch with some of the people that worked with me on some of the other metals bills. We did a couple of things, like we defined if we found out that those people were involved in a criminal enterprise, to try and actually up the penalty, from petty theft to something else that you could do if you could define that criminal enterprise that they're involved with in a way that kind of at least increase the penalties. But I'd be very interested in.
I want to make one additional note to that, in that there does need to be some serious regulations in the fact that I run it through my business legitimately. I pay income taxes on anything I make on there and have records to show for it. Right now, there's a lot of cash business going on that taxes we're missing for our schools and our roads, and some sort of, because it's just become such a huge industry.
I think it's a great idea. I think that sort of thing, anytime that we can do that, what we're trying to do is just shut it down and try and minimize the economic impact it would have on you. If you cash something in, you think it's 18 karat,
it's copper and silver.
It's copper, then you've been, the people have stolen from you. So it's, how do we close the net? It's amazing how many open things there still are. You think we have all these laws, and sometimes I think we're not necessarily locking up the right people. We have to have a lot of laws, but then there's still a lot of laws. I mean, there's a lot of things out there. That's why I love coming to these things. I learned something today. But Jordan, let's make sure we get the contact, and we'll have somebody give you a call tomorrow. That will probably be a staff from my office to see how we could actually take a look at possible legislation. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, could you share some light on what the legislature might do to help improve the transportation system of the state?
A part of what I think we have to start, we got to rethink whether or not we're talking about making the current framework work or rethink everything. And we did rethink everything back in the Depression era. When the counties started to go bankrupt, the state took ownership of what had been county roads. And that was the right thing at the time, because nobody had any money and the state was just struggling, and it was through federal funding and state funding that we kind of kept afloat. But I wish we'd go back and revisit whether or not, first and foremost, we have the ownership strategy right. Now, to those of you who may be involved with towns and counties, that doesn't mean we're just going to all of a sudden give you roads and not give you the money to maintain them. Part of what you also have to do is figure out, if you shifted ownership back to some sort of local or regional authority, then what revenues are we collecting now that ought to follow it? And then have the local regional areas figure out certain parts of it. There will still be state-owned roads and a state network that we need to deal with. But I think one of the ways the state will become more productive is to make it smaller, what we have to do, and kind of break this up. That's one concept. The other one is just step up to the reality that we don't have enough money going on the roads. How many people are mad about the gas tax that got raised in July? How many people can at least rationalize that the gas tax goes up and the legislature promises and pinky swears not to spend it on anything but roads, that you're okay with it as long as it goes to roads? I mean, I think most people are saying, look, if I honestly thought that this tax on gas was going to roads, then I'm probably okay. Well, there have been some legislative changes to a certain extent to eliminate general funds transfers, but it's still not enough money. And we're talking about going in and potentially capping it or freezing it or doing something else so that there's some stability there. Once we do that, we've still got a deficit in terms of the amount of money we need. Everywhere I go across this state, it's the one area of the state that's not getting its fair share. Everywhere I go. I don't care if it's Murphy, Manteo, or Mecklenburg. Every single one of them are either saying, we're not getting our fair share back, or we're not getting the fair share at the beginning, and I needed to be treated equitably. The equity formula, by and large, works. In 1989, they put this in place, trying to make sure that we get roads all across the state. It fundamentally makes sense. We don't need to be eliminating the equity formula. But we need to realize that things have changed just a little bit since 1989. The fundamental road formula hasn't changed. Governor proposed something called Mobility Fund, which I happen to support. I got hammered by some people on it, but we got to find a way to create other funds to make them available for congestion problems, for unique situations in rural areas, for safety problems, and we got to find new money to do it. How many people hate toll roads? How many people wouldn't mind having toll roads? How many people just don't want to stake themselves out? I actually am not fundamentally opposed to toll roads. I'm opposed to actually putting a toll on a road that's already built.
There you go.
But I'm not opposed in Mecklenburg County if we decide that we want a parallel corridor that can be paid for through tolls. And I can either choose to take corridor A, which doesn't have a toll, or corridor B. That's a decision I make. That becomes a user fee. And I think that if we don't start thinking about tolling some of these roads, we're going to be hard pressed to get ourselves, or tolling some projects, bridges and roads, we're going to be hard pressed to get sufficient money to get it done. And then if we also work on this thing to try and collaborate more with local folks. I had a situation in Cornelius where we were trying to accelerate a road. Cornelius only has the DOT will do it, and later on we'll get credit for it. But if we want to get it done now, we're going to have to take matters into our own hands. And we went around and we asked town people. We didn't do a referendum. We said if we put together a project that's going to add a couple of pennies on your property tax base for 4 years, it'll fund the road, and then we'll shut it down and get back to it. Are you willing to do it? They said yeah, and we did it. That was our way of doing a local option tax. You don't normally have that because the legislature has to authorize it. But one of the things we need to do is give towns and counties, this is an area where I think we need to give them more flexibility. And then you go live and die by whether or not you can convince people, I'm gonna do this tax, it's gonna build this road, and when this road's done, that tax goes away by law. And I think I'm in favor of giving more flexibility like that, and if you guys mess up, then your replacements can decide whether or not they should get rid of the tax. That's the way the elections work, and I think we have to do that. Let's see, 2 folks have asked questions. Anybody else? Somebody hadn't asked a question yet.
Thank you, Mr. Tillis. First of all, on behalf of myself and other commissioners in the room, we greatly appreciate the approach that was taken not to balance the budget on the back of the slope government. We got all involved as well now. But on redistricting, it was a fairly open process, a lot of public hearings throughout the state. How likely are we to move forward with that without a lot of downtime and discussion, et cetera?
Well, not having a court case in North Carolina on redistricting is about as likely as, I don't know, pick something highly unlikely. North Carolina is the most litigated state in the country on redistricting. It's like people have muscle memory. Even if everybody was in complete agreement, they'd probably follow suit just because it's the way it's done in North Carolina. Which kind of tells you we probably ought to do redistricting differently. So before I get to redistricting, I will tell you I was a co-sponsor of Independent Redistricting Commission my 2 terms before I became Speaker. I was also the speaker that allowed redistricting to be heard, or Independent Redistricting Commission, and the House voted in favor of moving forward with independent redistricting. Now, for those of you in the room saying you're talking out of both sides of your mouth because you should have done independent redistricting this year, it's because it was too late. If we wanted to do redistricting this year, the last leadership should have stepped up and passed the bill that we filed, and then we'd be doing an independent redistricting commission this year. Problem is, we took over. And you have to get the district plans out in about 4 or 5 months to get them through pre-clearance and to have time to get all the lawsuits, so you have a reasonable chance of them being in place the following year. So that's just to anticipate any questions around redistricting. I think the current process needs to be re-engineered and ultimately replaced, and hopefully that's what will happen in the next census. Now, back on redistricting, one of the reasons I was afraid I was going to be late is I met with the Attorney General this morning to talk about pre-clearance. We're working well with the Attorney General. The Attorney General is representing us. We're about to go through the filing. We're going to be doing it through the DC District Court as well as Department of Justice. And their staff say that we have a very solid argument for pre-clearance. The Attorney General, and those of you know that the Attorney General represents us all, but it's a partisan office. This is a Democrat Attorney General and his staff in a room with us telling us we have a solid case for pre-clearance. So I'm ardently optimistic that we'll have pre-clearance. Then all the lawsuits are going to happen. And I believe that what's going to happen there is we're going to prove to have had the most legally defensible districts that you've seen in recent times. And past district plans, one of them got thrown out down in Pender County. So we know that there have been people kind of pushing the envelope in the past. What I ask our committee chair to do and the legal counsel is follow it straight by the book. Get the baselines right and then engage the members to take care of local considerations to the extent the law allows it. But we've driven this process from the legal counsel experts, the map drawers and statisticians that actually understand the law to draw the baseline. So I'm very optimistic we'll get pre-clearance. And then I think we'll have several lawsuits we'll just have to deal with. Nature of the beast. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for all you do. And the state lottery, the money that's supposed to go for our education, you think it's all going where it needs to go?
No. Actually, last year I filed a bill to change. This is actually one of those bills. I'm glad we have a 10-bill rule because I shouldn't have filed it, but I did anyway. I was in the minority. I had a lot of time on my hands. I filed a bill that said we want to change the name of the education lottery to the lottery. And somebody in the press asked me, well, why are you doing it? Or why'd you pick the lottery? I said, because the lottery that sometimes is used for education but frequently used for purposes other than what you told the taxpayers you were going to use it before, when you put it before them, seemed to be too big to fit on the ticket. But the fact of the matter is we really do need to scope that. This is about public trust. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's why sunset and the taxes were so important to me. You lose your credibility when you make a promise to people and you break your promise 2 years later because you say, well, things kind of change. Well, if things change, come back to them and say, we may sunset it 2 years from now, or heck, this thing may be permanent. Tell them the truth. Tell them what you really were thinking when you did that. Same thing with the lottery. We will dedicate it to nothing but educational purposes. Fact of the matter is, it's been all over the board. And we need to tighten that up. There are some people that want to repeal the lottery. I think at this point, it's out there, it's the law. I'll hear arguments about it, but then if we do actually get it to the point to where it's being used for education, tell me where that extra couple $100 billion is going to come from if we repeal it. Because we do have that consequence. But first and foremost, we have to establish confidence in government by at least using it for the purpose it was originally intended and sold to the constituents. I'm not so sure people came out and said, heck, we're just going to use it for stuff. If it had gotten passed. Let me see people who haven't asked a question. This man over here has, and then I'll come around to folks who have a second question.
Is it possible for North Carolina to have on the gas pumps the percentage of ethanol in our gas? I have a son-in-law who uses a lot of gas and a lot of small engines, and he has a big problem with it.
With the ethanol content?
Airplanes.
I thought there was some requirement at some level. I don't. That's just not an area. Anybody here in the room?
Doctors might know.
It used to be. On there, but if
That's
it's
Bill.
more than 10%, you have to tell us more than 10%.
If it's more than 10. Today, that's still the rule?
10% is pretty much what everything is now, and they're working on. See, the pumps are not wanting to do a 15%, they'll disintegrate.
Yeah, because of the corrosive character. And by the way, everybody, I should have introduced former member Bill Daughtridge and one of my senior policy advisors. He's been amazing. I was bragging on Jeff Collins. I should have also bragged on Bill Daughtridge. Bill and I were seatmates in Finance Committee when I was a freshman. This was one term ago. He left us last year, our last term, but he's done an extraordinary job. He's been there on his own nickel helping us since transition. He doesn't accept pay from us, and yet he's around there working hard to really, he did an amazing job helping me as a new member come in and a new leader. And he's done an extraordinary job, keeps on doing it. I'm sure most of y'all know him, but I should have also publicly thanked Bill before I got started here. I guess it sounds like 10% is the rule. Are you saying something less than that?
Marinas don't use it, do
Some do and some don't. I got some in my boat that messed it up, so I
they?
have tracked down ones that don't.
Airports don't use it, do they? Okay, so there's a reason why it's not used.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm concerned that older cars it causes problems for, small engines it causes a problem for.
Yep.
And if we were to have a choice, and there are a few gas stations that do carry non-ethanol gas, it would be a big help, at least if we knew, put up there that there is ethanol in it, and we can find pumps that does not. A guy that has a boat and doesn't fill it up at a marina, but goes and fills it up at a gas station, and he gets some old gas with the deteriorated ethanol in it, he can have deterioration while he's out, have an explosion in the boat.
Bill, would you, would you mind just offline having a discussion with this gentleman, see if there's anything we really should follow?
Plus
up on
ethanol
legislation?
uses,
Yeah.
has less energy
Yes, sir.
per gallon.
Well, I'll tell you what, if I'm one of those gas stations that doesn't have ethanol content, I'd be putting a big old, we ain't got corn in our tanks out there somewhere. Because that's a differentiator. I mean, I really, from a marketing standpoint, I'd be from a private sector standpoint, I'd move pretty quickly to make it clear that I don't have ethanol in my tank.
The real issue now coming up, though, is that the federal government's trying to go to 15%. All the small engines are warranted at 10%. After 10%, it voids the warranty. So that's where the new great problem is.
Yeah. Colin, net new questions. People haven't asked a question first. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, this past session, we had a lot of increases in court costs and fines and fees that go through the criminal justice system. And I'm a criminal defense lawyer here in Rocky Mountain. I get a chance to see a whole lot of that up close and personal and how that's affected us. And well, I guess my question is probably better asked with an example. Suppose you've got somebody 25, 26 years old who's got a drug problem, gets caught and charged with possession of a small amount of cocaine and possession of drug paraphernalia. And this person's been in trouble before, has a record of 3 or 4, 5, 6 different convictions. Then this person comes to the court system, gets placed on term of probation, and as a part of that probation, they've got to pay back a lot of court costs, a lot of fines. 2 years ago, it cost the state $300 to test the substance to see what it was, to be sure it was cocaine. They increased that up to $600 now, about last year, I think. So you've got this person who's on probation because they have a criminal record. They're not able to really get a good job, and you're telling them to pay this money back. So we're trying to collect $1,000 or $2,000 from this person. They end up never being able to pay it back. So they come back to court, their probation's violated, and they're sent off to prison. They serve about a good 4-month sentence. They cost us about $9,000 to hold them in prison for 4 months. So we've got a lot of people who we're trying to collect $2,000 from. They can't pay it. We get about $300 or $400. Then we go spend $9,000 as their form of punishment. And I mean, logically, everyone wants someone to be punished in the event they committed a crime.
Are you familiar with justice reinvestment?
Yeah.
That's something I'm a big supporter of, and something we accelerate. It's been out there before, and I'm not really sure why the past leadership didn't pick it up, but I felt very strongly it's one way to drive some cost out and to deal with some of the situations you're talking. I do have to tell you, it flashed through my mind when you said you had an example. You got a guy that just got in trouble with, let's say, possession of cocaine or something, personal use, not for resale, but had been in trouble 4 or 5 times before. I'm going, at some point, this dude's kind of dragging us down here and costing us money. So they're a user of the system, and we didn't get it right, though. We did change some court fees, and we increased court fees. And I want to come back to your fundamental point. You make a great point, and I agree with virtually everything you've said, what I've inferred from your comments, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do. We increased fees in the courts because still, even after the fee increase, 50% of the cost of operating the courts is paid by you through taxes. We do not recover enough costs from the users of the judiciary to pay for it. It wouldn't make sense because the innocent person who has to use the courts because they've been wronged somehow or damaged, there's that user base. So it would never make sense to recover 100%. But we did start looking at it and say, how can we more or less put the burden back on the users of the judiciary to pay for it? We did a little bit of that. Some of the fee changes we did make sense. Some of them we're probably going to reverse because we've seen some examples out there like motion filings and things that are not, it doesn't seem like it makes sense or it's not necessarily fair. So we're looking at that in the interim. But we do need to come back and deal with this issue of particularly non-violent offenders. Violent offenders are off the table. We're going to keep them off the street for as long as we can and be consistent with the Constitution. Keep them out of society when they're obviously violent and a threat to public safety. But for these non-violent offenders and other people who just got caught up in the courts and maybe they were really bad shape in the past and they made a dumb decision, incarcerating them was going to cost us a lot of money, we're never going to get that money back. That's a part of the emphasis behind justice reinvestment. How do we kind of vector these people in and deal with them differently? But it's only step one. I went to Maury Prison. Anybody know where Maury is? I went to Maury Prison last Thursday. It's a 1,000 inmate close facility. There are non-violent offenders there. There are a lot of violent offenders there. But they all, 95% of them share all one thing in common. They're going to get out of prison someday. This is a closed facility. It's the highest level of supervision you can have. 95%, 950 on average, 950 of those 1,000 inmates are ultimately going to get out of prison someday. 60% of those are going to come back. It's just statistically true and sadly repeatable. We got to figure out a way to carve out of that population the ones that we can deal with in a way that makes them less likely they're going to be a repeat offender and get them out of there. And to the extent that they do need to answer for their crime, going back to prison may not necessarily be the best choice. There may be some other way to do it because it is very expensive. Now, as a Republican, I'm sure there's some people in the room saying he just gave a soft on crime speech, but that's not it at all. It's just impractical. It's an unsustainable model. We don't have the money to do it, and we're actually losing a lot of people who probably can be rehabilitated with the process that we have today. We don't have an answer for it, but at least you're talking to one speaker who gets a little bit of the problem you're talking about. We're trying to work on it. David Geis, in fact, you should note that name. He's Appropriations Chair for Justice and Public Safety. He worked in corrections. And Shirley Randleman is the co-chair, former our court clerk, that are working on this and working intensely to see, how do we implement and accelerate justice reinvestment. We've got to work out a few kinks with local government and county government because of how we're trying to optimize prison space and everything. But it's a good first step. And David Geis and I have had the same discussion you and I are kind of having here, and we got to do things differently.
Got time for a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
It appears to me that the majority of nonviolent folks we got at DOC right now starts out over some kind of drug addiction. Right now, I think we just closed 3 prisons this past year. I don't know exactly how many we still got open. Close 4.
Yeah. 4 ultimately be a consolidated.
And we've only got 2 drug treatment facilities within the Department of Corrections and 17, 18 prisons. And only about 100 beds in each of those. Everything just throwing a question out before you. Any thoughts in your mind on possible legislative changes to increase the number of drug treatment facilities that we have, so these folks that are going to be coming back out don't come back out with the exact same disease that's going to cause someone else in this room to end up getting hurt.
It's part of, I think it's part overall of what we're trying to do to try and keep people out of prisons, particularly people who have addictions. But it's a difficult issue. One thing I was surprised you didn't bring it up is we eliminated funding for drug courts.
Yep.
Drug courts, if it had been a statewide program and had legs across the state, may not have been on the bubble, but right now when we were making tough trade-offs, it was only in certain areas of the state it came off. But I think we have to revisit fundamentally what drug courts were doing as a part of that process and as a part of our emphasis on trying to just get better outcomes. But I see what you're saying, but right now, just with the scarce resources, I may have to be taking money. The decisions that we had to make were the money that rightfully should go for programs to try to help people get off the addictions that are primarily the reason why they're violating the law. and funding going to Medicaid recipients and other people. It was just scarce funds. So we just tried to do the best to stabilize the operations, and we've got to come back and look at a lot of that. And I think drug court is one of them we have to come back and look at. Any net new questions before I go back to people who raise their hand a second time? Yes, ma'am.
Speaker Tillis, I'm concerned about the
And I'm
way,
keeping on time too. 5 minutes? Okay.
I'm concerned about the way that mentally ill people in the state have been treated since the changes when Secretary Odom was in charge of DHHS. And it seems like putting them back in the community and asking the community to take care of them has not reaped the results that we wanted. Are y'all looking at that again? And I guess, again, with scarce resources, but there are a lot of things that aren't working well in taking care of our mental
We have
health.
there's a bad track record. We've inherited of what I think is a bad track record in dealing with mental health issues across the state. And it is something that our Health and Human Services, we're having our first meeting with Health and Human Services Oversight this week, and mental health is one of the key areas that we'll focus on in the interim. I personally, even basic, I kind of got crosswise with my county on this issue because we don't have enough mental health beds. We do not have enough statewide, and there was an issue between one of the hospitals that was trying to create an additional 40-bed facility over Mecklenburg County and the county, and they were actually arguing over something that had nothing to do with this mental health facility. It was some other negotiation over there, and that was one where I more or less said, we should never miss an opportunity to increase our capacity and capability about dealing with mental health problems in North Carolina. We've got, virtually all the other states do as well. It's an area that we're looking at. Up in Raleigh, we've got the very painful Dorothea Dix question, and how are we dealing with mental health issues downtown. So it's something that's a statewide issue. I don't care if you're in the most urban or most rural areas. It's something we're studying. It's not something we did much of, except to try and minimize the impacts in this budget. And having said that, we still had some impact. I will tell you though that to the extent the counties are involved in mental health scenario, and they are, we help them by not shifting $100 million of burden down to you all that would have necessarily meant to the extent that you are working in mental health issues down in your counties, that just being one less dollar you had to spend.
But mental health and his question, they're hand in hand, because a lot of the fellows probably got mental health problems that abuse drugs and end up.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, they're all intertwined. No question. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Have you considered instead of looking for extra dollars to solve problems, to partnering with other groups, organizations, even faith-based, that are trying to solve the problems, but can't seem to get over the hump? Because going back to the gentleman's question about nonviolent offenders, in Nash County, we have an organization that is trying to build a way for nonviolent offenders to come out, to get trained, to stay out of those areas where they go right back in.
Yeah.
But for some reason they can't find and get over the hump to do that.
I'm glad you asked that question.
Because in some areas, I don't want that in mind. I don't want that next door to me.
Well, there was the old not in my backyard in this healthcare facility, the mental health facility. It's up in a residential area. People say, I want to solve mental health, just none in my neighborhood. But the fact of the matter is, those was very limited. When they really looked at the project, they realized it was the right thing to do. On other ways to do it, we're going to have a select committee, and it's only a House. I don't think the Senate has appointed one. I've authorized the creation of a select committee on public-private partnerships. And the whole idea is look across the state and figure out what we can do to really help nonprofits, help for-profits, help other people that have a great idea that may just need a little bit of involvement from the state or a partnership to make it happen. Partnership may be just to eliminate all the laws that prevent people from doing it. It may be economic. It could be any number of things. And when we talk about public-private partnerships, to me, it's with the delivery of anything that government does. Now you go back to faith-based communities. Part of what we have to do there, it has more to do with running afoul of people that think that churches shouldn't be involved in helping solve social ills. It's one of the most absurd notions I've ever heard of in my life, but it is true. And so we have to figure out legally how we can do that and work in faith-based community. But heck, I got people complaining. I let rank and file members say the prayer every day, and I got the ACLU complaining about that. So I know they'll complain about us trying to work with churches, but the fact of the matter is, churches in a lot of these communities, and particularly in areas where the crime is the highest, churches are probably the best path to kind of reaching out and having credibility with the people that they're working with to try and get them to the right track for help. Yes, sir.
Medicaid, I know you addressed this before, and this is regarding your question. There's a lot of Medicaid billing out from nonprofits in mental health for next to zero performance and zero competency, and they're billing out for hours. And this is a huge area of fraud and a very expensive area of fraud, and there needs to be more oversight of Medicaid in these areas because it's a mess and it is bordering on crime.
It is. In fact, one of the things that we're looking at, and it's going to make certain providers mad, but we think one of the ways that you can get that under control is to limit the number of providers that the state is directly dealing with and be very specific about service levels and governance with the ones you do deal with. Because there's a lot of oversight issues. They're just spread so far out, it's kind of hard to provide the oversight, to know the money's being spent properly and in the manner intended. We have some, in our Health and Human Services Oversight Committee, one of the things we're looking at is how do you look at the current provider networks and maybe reconfigure them so that you have better and more hands-on oversight. That solves some of the problems. There's still, I think there has to be legal consequences for some of these things. It's not like smack you on the hand, have you decertified. It's fine you and put you out of business sorts of legislation that we have to look at in some of these cases. And that's what Health and Human, I'm pointing to Jeff. I don't think he's on Health and Human Services Oversight, but that's what the legislators will be looking at in the interim. Any other net new questions? Got maybe time for one or two follow-up. Y'all do paper, scissors, rock. So is that tape?
Video poker.
Okay, yeah.
Where are we? At least South Carolina's figured it out.
All right, well, I like doing these straw polls. How many people are in favor of legalizing video poker or video sweepstakes?
Until we do away with the lottery.
Well, I won't come to that. Okay,
until we do away with our
state monopoly. How many of you are completely
I'm
against it under any circumstances? All right, so most of you are not staked out. That's good. That's where I am. Here's the problem. I'm also, I said to the lady over here, I'm kind of a limited government person. I kind of contradicted myself when you asked the question. But then I'm also a free market person. And I actually believe that in this area, the thing is the providers of this technology have always found a way to redefine their technology a week or two after a law was passed to go back in business. We outlawed video poker. How many people think that fundamentally that game is not being played right now within 10 minutes of this restaurant? Legally. It is.
10 locations.
It is. Because, because the weird, the thing about the law that I learned, there are some people that say, well, let's just make it a part of the lottery. Let's just make this be an oversight of the lottery and other education source. Because one of the ways that you could outlaw a specific sort of, like when they do these internet machines and everything, one of the ways you could outlaw it is by defining what is legal. And then by definition, everything else is illegal. What we've been doing to this point is we just go around and say, that's illegal. They say, okay, we won't do that anymore, we'll do this. With the same terminal. So at some point, we have to decide, can we really control it? Or at some level, should we regulate it and tax it and have that be a net new revenue? That's the question that has to be asked. And that's another one where as a conservative, I'm going to get hammered by somebody because now I've told you I'm soft on crime and I love gambling. Now, Doug just recorded that, and I hope if you use that on a website, you'll include this disclaimer. Doug's with an organization that tries to keep me honest, but in that particular case, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying let's be practical about the issue and recognize that we're losing. And over the course of the years that we've tried to play that game, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue that could potentially have been used in the state isn't. I'll give you one other parallel, and then I'm going to let somebody who ran for office talk last, or ran a couple of years ago in a legislative seat. The Cherokee Nation right now, how many of y'all have ever been out to the Eastern Band of the Cherokees, to the Boundary? I've been through it. I've actually never been in the casino. I'm not a gambler. I'm not opposed to gambling. I'm just not one that, being a numbers guy, I'm always worried about the odds being against me. But honestly, that's what it comes down to. The Eastern Band has requested that their casino be allowed to engage in a different class of gambling. And right now they do, like if you go out and play poker or something, you play a table game, it's electronic. You're interacting with a video machine. They actually want to do something that doesn't happen very often these days. They actually want to replace computers with human beings.
Good.
And it would create about 300 jobs in the casinos for professional dealers, and it's estimated as a result of that to also create another 1,000 or so jobs out of Western North Carolina, not just in the Boundary, but in Western North Carolina. I look at that, and I know I have members in my caucus that are just, for religious or other personal reasons, are completely against gambling and would be opposed to that in every circumstance. When I look at that as a free market sort of person and somebody's trying to create jobs, I'm not so quick to jump on that bandwagon if that's what the Eastern Band, if that's what the Cherokee Nation wants to do, Eastern Band wants to do. But those are the sorts of decisions we're confronted with. It would also create ultimately tens of millions of dollars of revenue for the state just to allow them to do that, potentially. And so those are the sorts of things we're working through. It just made me think about it because of the connection to sweeps or video poker, those things. But we just got to step up and have an honest discussion about that versus the sort of emotional back and forth. And quite honestly, I think the leadership last year missed an opportunity to step up and do that. And it's gonna, you'll read the newspaper and you'll say those doggone Republicans are going and doing crazy things, but we have an obligation to look at these policy decisions and not just be afraid of them and stick them away, because that's not good leadership. Even if it causes some dissension in the ranks and it requires people that are in the middle of the issue to actually support the implementation of it and respectfully disagree with your own colleagues if it comes to that. I mean, I haven't even talked with Jeff about it. I don't know where Jeff is on it, but I think that's, my role as a speaker is to get the dialogue going, get the discussion going. And believe me, there are things that go on that floor that I wish would never come up, but my job is to honor the will of folks that want to hear things heard and not act like I'm the dictator that allows the agenda to be set. It's not the appropriate way to lead. Guys, I think that's all the time we have. I'm sorry. I promised you.
I want to thank you for coming to Rocky Mountain. We thank you for what you've done, and we agree with probably 90-95%. The one thing you just got
5% is going to kill me.
The state ruled that these machines were illegal a year ago, and municipalities said, well, there's no point in us putting a tax on them.
The privilege license tax.
Because the state is going to do it. Municipalities have lost thousands of dollars.
I'd say millions.
Millions probably. Because we've got one right here in Rocky Mountain that
there's
more cars sitting at that place at 9 o'clock in the evening than it is at the restaurant across the street.
So hurry up and implement PLT and see what happens afterwards. I really do. I do feel, I understand the impact on towns and the uncertainty. That's why I think we need to step up and either definitively stick a stake in the heart of this if we can. And constitutionally otherwise, I don't know that we can. Unless you go and define a game as a certain way and say everything but this is illegal and this can only be done by the state. That's how you actually define it. But that by definition means that the state's going to get in that business. So this is one where, like annexation reform, tort reform, malpractice, all these other things that the past leaders have been sitting on, not doing anything about, so we were always talking about. That's why we got that done in these first 83 legislative days and stuff like this. I want us to have a definitive answer before we're out of here next spring. Yeah. Well, thank you.